Hello and welcome to the Gwinnett Force. I'm Julie Monty, along with my fellow Family Violence Task Force member, Sergeant Tracy Lee.
Hello.
And this episode we'll be discussing anger management with our special guest host, Jennifer Hope from Atlanta Family Counseling, and Deputy Shannon Volkodoff from the Gwinnett County Sheriff's Office.
Hello.
Hey. Sergeant Lee, before we start our discussion on anger management, can you update us on some of the things that have happened recently?
I sure will. First of all, I'd like to welcome Shannon to the show and introduce her as our new Public Information Officer with the Sheriff's Office. Got a little picture of her in action there at her desk. She's got a really nice office.
Are you jealous?
Oh, I'm very, very jealous. Right up there next to the sheriff. Tell us a little bit about your job.
Well, I began my law enforcement career about 17 years ago when I began working with the Atlanta Police Department as a police officer. When I left the Atlanta Police Department to stay home for a few years with my children, I decided to return to the workforce, and I came to the Gwinnett County Sheriff's Office. I was recently appointed as the Public Information Officer, so I'm very happy and very honored to have that position.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. And I appreciate you having me here today.
Oh,
Sure. So we hear you get a new toy. Tell us about that.
Did you get a new vehicle?
Yes, I did. I got a new Tahoe. The supervisors got Tahoes in field operations, and I really like it. I just want to thank the Sheriff Butch Conway, and the commissioners for getting us a really, and the taxpayer, a really nice vehicle. I think it's going to really give us good service, carries all my equipment. Really like it. It's great on my back too. And
Much more space for you.
much more. You know, it really helps over a car.
We had a Gwinnett County Family Fun Day, a couple months ago, and you've got some pictures from that.
Terry with the task force, and refresh my memory, what's her last name?
Lewis?
Yes, she really put a lot of work into this.
Yeah.
And
It was a great turnout, by the way.
oh, excellent turnout. As you can see, we've got a couple pictures here. There's a picture of Francis on the right, who is our president. They're doing the little Charlie's Angels pose. Had a blast. The next picture I had was of a couple of the task force members from the DA's office. And the weather was perfect, and we all had
It was beautiful that day.
It really was. And I got a picture here of myself giving Chopper a patch.
Which one are you?
Yeah, by the way, viewers, I'm the one on the right.
He's wearing the uniform. That's how you know it's him.
Oh, okay.
So,
He was holding that patch. I wasn't quite sure.
yeah, he's so another thing I'd like to mention, the new battered women's shelter opened up in Gwinnett, and we can't give you the location, obviously, but I did get a tour the other day of it. Have y'all been to it
I have
yet?
not been there.
I've heard about it. I'm so glad because
Yeah.
it was really needed. I mean,
Yeah,
I used to
almost-
work in the old one, and
I about fell through the floor over there, but
oh yeah.
so yeah, the new one is really nice, and I encourage you
Haiti,
to I encourage you to take a tour of it if you get a chance.
Yeah, definitely.
They've really done a good job. I'd like to show a picture here of Corporal Fusey. He just left the family violence unit. We gave him a plaque, as you can see. He is going to the warrant division, but he gave us 5 years of dedicated service and leadership in the family violence unit.
We
And-
appreciate that service. You guys do a
and
great job.
he is really going to be missed. He really is. And but yeah, thank you, Corporal Fusey, for doing what you did. And
You've got a picture of Jody Arias.
yes,
That case was pretty interesting.
talk to Shannon a little bit about that. And I really don't know much about
I think
the
she
case.
probably knows the most out of all of
Tell
us.
us about this case.
When we were discussing that we'd be discussing anger management today, she was the first person that came to mind. Certainly she's been in the news quite a bit recently with her recent trial. She was recently convicted of murdering her boyfriend, Travis Alexander. And apparently these two were in a dating relationship. They broke up at some point. I certainly get the impression that she was not happy about the breakup, and there were some reports that perhaps she was stalking him. He was found in his bathroom in his home. He had sustained a gunshot wound to the head, 27 to 29 stab wounds, as well as his throat was also slit.
What was she trying to say?
Well, initially she claimed to have no involvement. Then she claimed that,
Self-defense.
well, she actually claimed first that it was a home invasion and that she was present during a home invasion. And then at some point she said that it was self-defense, and she claimed to be a battered woman in this domestic violence situation.
Was there ever a protection order against him or
Not
her?
Good,
that I'm aware of.
good question.
Just, yeah, just-
But interestingly, when his body was discovered, all of his friends immediately were telling the police she did it. She did it, even though she was living in another state with her grandparents apparently, but she apparently had some contact with him. And also, I don't know if you guys know, but there were some pictures that were taken of Travis in the shower just moments before he was killed. The camera was found in a washing machine, and they were able to recover some pictures. And there's actually a picture of him on the floor. I guess the camera was taking pictures. You know, sometimes it'll continue snapping photos. So there's a lot of evidence against her. The weapon, there was the type of weapon that was used in the murder was also the same type of weapon that was stolen from her grandparents' home just a few days before.
And the gun, I think, was that the grandparents or was that on the
It had
top?
been reported stolen from her grandparents' home with whom she lived. So
Well, now, going back to the picture of Jody, looking at her, she looks like a daycare teacher.
she does.
You wouldn't
Well, that was her get up for court. I mean, she, in her previous pictures when they were dating, she was blonde and, you know, no glasses and made up and.
They don't let you dye your hair blonde in jail, apparently. So.
So talk about anger management. I mean, you know, looks like Lizzie Borden, you know.
Sounds like a crime of passion to me. I've heard reports that Travis initially had let his company know he was traveling to, I think, Cancun or someplace like that, and probably some type of, you know, business trip, and he was supposed to be taking Jodi Arias, but then he reportedly changed the plans with his office and indicated that he would be bringing another female companion. So that would certainly be my first thought, that
Well,
perhaps
yeah.
that's what precipitated his
Jealous
murder.
is definitely an underlying emotion for that anger. The anger is the response that we have, but the underlying feeling is always something different. That's why
Sounds like
anger-
she needed anger management.
Well, that sounds like a good time to take a short break, and when we get back, we'll ask Jennifer what anger management means. We'll be right back.
The average text takes your eyes off the road for nearly 5 seconds.
Welcome back to the Gwinnett Force. Jennifer, what is anger management?
Well, when we talk about anger and managing it, we're really talking about controlling that emotional response to something. So when we have an anger response that is problematic, that's the thing that we're needing to manage. So some people act out in anger responses by throwing things, breaking things, lashing out verbally. So those types of things are
Sounds like
helpful
we
in
need to
management.
start from like childbirth, because like you look at the children, they're always throwing stuff when they don't get their way.
Well, and a lot of times anger is very socialized, especially for boys or men. It's okay for them to react out of anger. These other emotions that they're experiencing aren't necessarily okay as far as society goes to express, which is why in anger management groups or therapy, you really focus on getting to identifying that emotion, recognizing it, and being able to communicate that effectively.
I was going to ask you, how does it work? Is that what you have to do?
Yeah, I mean, typically it works better, you know, in a group or individual sessions with somebody that's licensed as a professional counselor or some kind of specialist to help with the anger.
So how do you know who needs anger management? Because obviously we all get angry at some point or another. So how do you know the difference between somebody who's just exhibiting anger that's a normal emotion that we all experience, and somebody who perhaps would benefit from anger management training.
Right, exactly. So it's totally okay to be angry. That is an appropriate response to something that's happening. But when it becomes problematic, so let's say if people do have legal problems because of it, if their family's threatening to leave because of it, if it's causing any kind of distress in day-to-day functioning, work, school, home, those are the types of things that would indicate that somebody would need help for that.
Help managing that.
The unfortunate thing is sometimes it takes a significant event for that to
Right,
occur. So people
right.
aren't always cognizant that, oh, this is a problem for me. It typically
Right.
does take a significant event for that to
Well,
happen.
probably someone living with a person that has a lot of anger, they probably become a little desensitized to it. You know,
Sure.
that's just the way he is, that's just the way he's wired, or that she's wired. And so you're right, it probably sometimes, unfortunately, does take a very significant event to, you know, and
And-
hindsight's always 20/20.
Exactly, and what happens with that person a lot of times is you've all heard that term walking on eggshells, so
Yes,
they'll try
yes.
to avoid conflict, and then those people don't express themselves appropriately. That can lead to built up resentments, which ultimately leads to that explosion of anger.
Well, that kind of reminds me of the domestic violence portion of it, when you're walking on eggshells, because typically that's a situation that you're in during that time period. What about alcohol, drugs?
Yeah, I mean, that can definitely add to it, but people can be angry without a substance.
Right.
But there are some people that tend to just get more aggressive when they're drinking or using drugs or something.
Well, let's talk about some of the things that make people angry, like grief.
And when you talk about grief, everybody's probably familiar with the 5 stages, but anger is one of them. And so people are angry at themselves. They're, angry at spirituality. They're angry at the person for leaving them. So there is a lot of anger that needs to be worked through with that.
No, like fatigue, you get tired, you get cranky.
Well, and we have a saying, HALT, hungry, angry, lonely, tired. So if you have any of those, just don't engage with anybody.
In the family violence business, child custody really strikes a nerve.
Yes.
Whenever we have to take a child away from one of the parents or something,
Oh, sure.
And that's a really dangerous time,
Yeah.
too. I mean,
Absolutely.
So,
going back to the case that I want to review this year, there was a child exchange where he stabbed the wife and killed her. So it happens, and we've done several reviews where that happened during child exchange.
I think there was a case just the other day in Jefferson where a man
Yes,
killed
his
his
wife and son.
wife and son.
13-year-old
Yeah.
son.
I don't know much about it, but I
We had a
did.
shooting in Swanee, at the Swanee Walmart, just a couple of years ago during a custody
I think we
exchange.
talked about
No, this was a I think that's this one here, the
Oh,
stabbing.
was it that one, was it a stabbing?
Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of times people are using the children because they know it's going to hurt the other person, and so it elicits that emotional reaction that maybe they didn't think they got from that person. But when you involve the kids, then they get
Right.
that.
How about bullying? I mean, people use the bullying excuse for, I did that, he was bullied, he was bullied. I mean,
Sure, I mean, I think that, well, bullies typically will have some kind of level of anger just in general because they would think that, and it can come from insecurity. So if you feel insecure, it's okay to be angry about it. It's not okay to walk around and say, I feel really insecure. But it's okay to say, I'm better than you and you make me angry.
So why do we wait until adulthood to react to anger management? Shouldn't we be teaching this from an early age?
Should be, and I hear it from the groups, especially the domestic violence groups that I facilitate, is why don't we learn these things before? Right. If we had these skills that we learn here, we wouldn't be in this position today. And I think that preventative is very important.
tell us and our viewers a little bit about Atlanta Family Counseling.
Yeah, so Atlanta Family Counseling is right in Lawrenceville. We're at 190 Camden Hill Road, and we're comprised of all licensed professional counselors. And so we do individual group therapy, alcohol and drug, anger management, domestic violence. We do men and women's groups, so they would be separate through anger management and domestic violence. We also do see individuals, adolescents and adults that are having these kind of issues, and we take we're on all the major insurance panels, so they can just give us a call at 770-513-8988 or visit our website at www.afcounseling.com for more information.
Okay, we'll give that number again at the end of the
Okay,
show.
great.
Absolutely. What about like road rage?
Yeah, well, and part of, going through the anger management process will help people to, recognize that first there's a physiological response. And we've all felt this. When someone cuts you off, what do you feel? Your heart rate go up, right? And so then your breathing gets really heavy and your thoughts are racing. And the reason why your thoughts are racing is because your brain is not getting the oxygen that it needs to slow down. So once we can learn to take deep breaths, in for 5, hold for 5, out for 5, we can slow down that process and really put things into perspective. Is this going to matter in 5 years? It's not going to matter in 5 seconds, but the 5-year
Do you
part.
find that people that do have substantial anger issues, do you feel like it's more environmental or more hereditary? Can you inherit? Is there a genetic link between, like perhaps parents that have children
That's a good
that have anger
question.
issues, or would that be mostly, well, that was the environmental exposure, to parents that were also angry? What do you think about that?
Well, from a neurochemical perspective, those things can be predisposed. So there are some people that, will naturally have less serotonin, which is going to be your emotional regulation neurochemical. The other part is dopamine. So when those are both low, then it's really hard to kind of manage emotions. Now, those things are predisposed. As far as the responses, like throwing things, breaking things, lashing out, that tends to be more of a learned behavior. So if we grew up seeing those types of behaviors, we're likely to just think that's how you manage anger because that's the only thing that we've been exposed to.
So someone who is predisposed to anger to begin with, when they go to anger management classes, is that going to remove that emotion of anger, or is that something that never goes away, but they just simply learn tools how to deal with it?
Exactly. So what they'll learn is how to recognize that physiological response first, because if you can manage that, then likelihood of those impulse behaviors or that explosion are going to be much lower. So if you can just recognize that physiological component first and learn how to manage that, plus that underlying emotional issue, they're in a really good position to change.
So do you feel like everybody has the ability to behave appropriately, even if they experience a lot of anger? Because I've heard people say, I knew I was gonna go, but I just couldn't stop it. Is there any truth
Well,
to that? I've
no,
heard
because
that so
they're
commonly as a law enforcement officer.
Yeah.
Is there any truth?
You go to
that?
0 to 60 now.
Obviously, they do have the ability to control their behavior regardless of their emotions.
Absolutely. I mean, there is some cognition involved in picking something up and throwing it.
Right.
That just doesn't happen because our brain doesn't know to do that unless we tell our hand to do it.
My boss says he blacks out. He doesn't remember anything.
It's not uncommon for
I've
people
heard
to
that.
do that.
Yes.
And the reason is because your adrenaline is so high, and what happens is your cortisol's pumping, which is good because you need that. That's our fight or flight chemical. But when it's pumping too much, then it does lead to those other parts of the brain being hindered,
Well,
which is
too-
decision-making parts, all that frontal lobe functioning
Right.
that we need.
Well, and some people too, I mean, I've been on many scenes where, domestic violence scenes, and you see just, when you go into these apartments, you see numerous holes in the wall where someone's just put their fist through the wall.
Yeah.
And I guess at the
Yeah.
end of the day, I'd rather them put their fist through a wall than into their, family member's face, but there's got to be another alternative as well. Are there medications that also help control those?
There aren't medications specifically for anger management, but some of the antidepressants or anti-anxiety medication do help kind of regulate those neurochemicals that we talked about earlier. Also, some ADHD medication has been effective in controlling that agitation part. So you just have to kind of talk to your doctor about what would be better. But yeah, there's nothing that says this is for anger, but it does help. Right, and then,
Wouldn't it be great if it were that easy? It's like an easy button.
right.
Well, we're going to take a short break. We'll be right back. Stay tuned.
You can say with me, imagine what you'd see if every child had a book to read.
So the mission is for us to get a book to each and every child.
So let's join hands, book people unite, unearth hidden passion. Come on, we'll have a good time. One book can be the first little thing that helps to change a life.
People unite.
Read to a child today and spark a lifetime of ambition.
If you drive buzzed, it could cost you around $10,000. You'll face major legal fees, major fines, and steep insurance penalties. You could lose everything. Nothing kills a buzz like getting pulled over for buzz driving, because buzz driving is drunk driving.
Welcome back to the Gwinnett Force. Jennifer, tell us what causes some people to be angrier than others, do you think?
Well, I think it kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier. Some people are predisposed to have different neurochemicals work different ways, and so some people will have lower amounts of serotonin, which is typically where your brain will regulate the emotion. So if somebody has a really high level, their emotional regulation is going to be much more appropriate than somebody that has a low level.
What do you think what level do you think that the man you have in the picture that you were going to show?
Yeah,
What level do you think he's at?
This picture I have of this man here, obviously he's angry at somebody. He's getting ready to go off.
Yes, it appears that way.
Sometimes you can just look at a person and know they're angry,
Yes.
the angry type.
People have an angry demeanor.
You know what I'm saying? And it's just,
We all know those.
We had one of those on our street growing up. You know, you never didn't want to kick a ball into their yard because you were getting that one back.
Well, and a lot of it goes back to that thought process too. So when people are always thinking the worst things are going to happen or people are out to get me, that kind of precipitates those anger responses.
well, you know, I've known people where they say, well, we got the family temper. You know, oh, my dad had a temper, I got a temper. You know, is there any truth to that? I mean, is it genetic?
Yeah, I mean, those parts of the brain would be as far as the neurochemicals go. And also when you talk about, oh, my dad did this and my brother and my uncle, then it looks like that's also a learned behavior. And so your environment does dictate a lot about how you interact with things as adults.
What about PMS?
Is there any
Is
truth
there?
to the PMS thing?
How fortunate there are 3 women at the table for this topic.
I'm gonna get back to that.
I do not suffer from that any longer, but I had to threaten my doctor to get to that
Well,
point.
I mean, we've all heard that excuse before.
So women are very unique in the fact that they have different cycles during the month, and so at certain periods of time, their hormones actually change. And so when you're used to being like this, let's just say, and then your hormones are changing, it does create different responses or elicit responses that seem abnormal to that person. So as far as not being able to handle stress or manage things in the way that that person would typically do during that cycling time, yes, there is definitely a change, and so that could contribute to some anger responses.
So there is some truth to it.
Yeah, and so now, you know, it's fortunate that they do have some, you know, female hormone complexes that help kind of regulate those things. But again, that's something to talk to your doctor about if that's been problematic.
Why do you think some rational people lose control occasionally? Somebody that normally is pretty even-keeled and
What we call it is like a threshold, right? And so if you can imagine like a Coca-Cola bottle and shaking it up and then opening it and there it goes off, right? So everything's
Everybody's
everywhere.
got a breaking point, right?
So, you know, it kind of builds in layers. So if something happens and maybe nobody says anything about it, it doesn't go away. It still just kind of sits there. And then something else happens and maybe we think, oh, it's not important enough to say anything, and then that builds on. And then very seldom is the part that somebody explodes on really the issue. Because it's all those things that have
usually a
built up
combination
that,
of many
right,
things.
and then there's nowhere else for
Right.
that stuff
Which
to
is
go.
why you see that in domestic violence situations. You know, there are things that it's a building effect, like you said, like shaking a Coke in a bottle. And also you have the element of the emotion. You know, I was sharing with you guys earlier that when I was a police officer policing in Southwest Atlanta, you know, people would say terrible things to me. And it didn't upset me because I didn't have any emotional I didn't have any connection, any personal ties with these people, and so there was nothing they could say to elicit an emotional reaction in me because, you know, I didn't care about them on the level that I care about someone that I know and that I love.
I would tell my rookies when I was training them, just don't take it personal, okay?
You really cannot take it personally. If you react emotionally to things like that, this probably is not a good profession for you because you really have to keep it in perspective and consider the source. So
It's kind of the same thing with our counselors and the groups, especially, you know, anger management or domestic violence. They're very angry that they have to have been mandated to be there, and so, you know, their response to us is, you know, you put me here, and so there has to be some accountability going back to that in order to have change.
right.
Speaking of that, what do you think the recidivism rate is for the programs? For instance, if you are ordered by the court to go to anger management or FPIP?
Yeah, It's hard to. I think they work
Does it
because
work?
you can see changes. You know, as a facilitator, I can see people when they come in on day 1, and then week 12 or week 24, they're very much different in their thought process, in their demeanor, in the way.
Have you seen them come back?
I haven't seen anybody come back to those programs for a new charge. That being said, that doesn't necessarily mean they haven't reoffended. Maybe they're just not coming back there. I don't know. It's hard to tell what the longitudinal effect is. But, we do get plenty of calls saying, thank you so much, that helped. And we'll get calls years later from people that have completed the program. So, we really, you really work to making sure they understand why they're doing this, because it's really easy to blame. Well, I got mad because you cut me off, going back to that road rage. And really, it's not about that. It's about your response to that. So part of a lot what we say is you're going to be provoked every day. The only thing you can be accountable is for how you control that situation within yourself.
And, for some of these people, they may never have had these simple lessons, these life lessons from their parents.
Right.
We certainly at the jail, in the jail environment, we have inmates, and sometimes I think, some of these people come from backgrounds where no one has ever explained to them how to, if you don't, if you're not equipping your children as a parent with tools, coping mechanisms, and appropriate behaviors, of course they're not gonna, and then they're gonna end up in jail. So I think it's very important. I stopped at a sub shop the other day, and I was in my uniform, and one of the guys that works at the sub shop, he said, Gwinnett County is the only jail I've never been to. And I said, well, you seem like a nice kid. What do you keep getting locked up for? And he said, I have serious anger management problems.
Wow.
And I said, well, I just happened to be, I'm going to be filming a show on anger management. I said, do you mind sharing with me a little bit about that? And he was explaining that he lived with his uncle, and he was always fighting with his uncle. And he had to take the court-ordered anger management classes. And I said, well, did it help you? Was there anything that you learned in the class? And he said it did. He said, there's one thing that I remember, and that was just to stop and count to 10. And something just that simple has kept this kid out of jail.
At least out of Gwinnett County.
He said, so far, I told him, I said, I better never see you come into the jail. But sometimes even you can give people a wealth of information, and sometimes it's just one thing, and it may be something as simple as stopping and counting to 10, and that helps them control.
Is that a good technique?
Yeah, that's very appropriate, because and also breathing. You've got to breathe while you're doing that. That's that deep breathing in for 5, hold for 5, out for 5, because
I mean,
that's
a lot of these crimes that are committed with domestic violence, the next day they got to be saying, why did I do that? I mean, just
You would like to think that they would.
sometimes the next day. Yes, you would like to think that that's what happened. Sometimes the next day it's, why did you do this to me? Or I can't believe that happened. And so that's why that accountability piece is so important. And that's what the groups are working with somebody is going to show, because there's no way you can sit through with a licensed person and them not confront you on that, challenge you.
And you really do have to be, self-reflective, I would imagine, to help control anger, because even like in a marriage situation, if you and your partner are having an argument, and all you're focusing on is the things that he said that make me mad, of course, I'm going to be angry about that. But if you take a minute to think, okay, well, he probably said that because I said this, and then it kind of evens the playing field a little bit, and then you don't have that resentment and that anger. And so I think that would be a critical part of learning to control your anger, I would think.
And a lot of that, especially in intimate relationships, is somebody feels attacked by their partner, and so then their natural response is being defensive, and so that can lead to, an attack on the other person as well.
I would think jealousy would play a big role in people losing their temper in situations in domestic situations. It's a really hard emotion to control.
Right, so that being said, it would be really difficult sometimes for people to say, oh, I feel jealous about this behavior. And so they would say, it made me angry that you did this. Right, instead of really getting the anger isn't the issue, it's the jealousy.
Jennifer, if you'll do us a favor and give us your information one more time.
Sure. It's Atlanta Family Counseling, and we're at 190 Camden Hill Road.
That's right at
and we're
29, right?
Yeah, we're right in Lawrenceville. We're about a mile from the courthouse, and our number is 513-8988, and our website is www.afcounseling.com. Again, we're all licensed professional counselors, so we see anger management, domestic violence, alcohol and drug, individual and group therapy.
I'd like to mention a website I saw the other day called angerbuster.com. It's for Georgia.
Okay.
You can go to that website, and it has phone numbers, other websites that you can go to for information, crisis lines. It's a really good website. So if somebody out there has anger issues or knows somebody that has anger issues, go to that website and read it. And I guess the main thing is do something. Just,
Yeah.
you got to do something. I mean, just don't let it keep going, because eventually it just snowballs and gets worse.
And Deputy Volkadov, sorry. I'll
Yes,
get
that's,
rid of
hey,
these
that was great.
Welcome to the Sheriff's Department and your
Well,
new
thank
position,
you.
and I know you're going to do
Thank
a great
you, I
job.
appreciate that.
Look for her on the news. Any
Yeah,
big
like
breaking
that.
stories with the sheriff's office, she'll be right up there. And like I said, I'm thinking about getting her autograph now before she gets too famous.
I'll give it to you, but I got to charge you for it.
That's right. That's all the time we have for this episode. We'd like to thank our special guests for joining us on the Gwinnett Force today. Jennifer Hope with Atlanta Family Counseling.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And Shannon Volkadov with the Gwinnett County Sheriff's Department.
Thank you very much for having
Thank
me.
you both for being here.
And Sergeant Lee, as always.
And Julie Monty.
We'd like to thank you for watching the Gwinnett Force on TV Gwinnett, and our website is gwinnettfamilyviolence.org. Thank you.
Thanks.
Someone